All right, good morning, everybody. Now, yesterday, the state told you that this case was going to be about a dysfunctional family. And they're right about that. But that family is not Jeff and Spence's. That's actually Kirby's family. You're going to hear proof that the day Caitlin found her boyfriend's body, that Kirby's mom, Maddie Jane Jones, was over hours later at the house with some of her friends and whoever else. And while Caitlin was grieving, Maddie Jane and her friends were going through every piece of property that Kirby owned. They were opening safes, they were taking guns, they were taking cash, they were taking who knows what else, guitars, stealing everything of value. Now, the day Kirby Carpenter was killed, Jeff was in Virginia. He was in Virginia with his wife. And when they heard news, when Caitlin called them, told them what happened, the next day they came down to Tippah County. And when they got there, what they saw was Maddie Jane and all these other people who barely even talked to Kirby when he was alive were looting his house, ransacking. And you're going to hear about how Jeff, and actually one of Kirby's friends, called the police, told them what was going on, changed the locks to the house so those people couldn't get in, and had to change the code to the safe so those people would stop stealing Kirby's things. I don't think you're going to hear any proof from any witness from that stand that Jeff Spence put a bunch of coins in his car. That's what Maddie Jane tells the police, the one who's stealing her son's things. Now, eventually Maddie Jane, a couple days later, tells Caitlin that Caitlin and Enola, her 4-month-old daughter, they need to go. They got to get out of the house. It's not their house. So after Kirby's funeral, the Spences leave. They get a U-Haul, put Caitlin's things in there, and they go back to Virginia. And now there's a murder investigation. Maddie Jane knows that Caitlin must have had something to do with this. And you'll hear from Caitlin. You can be the judge of that. The problem is, Caitlin's on camera breastfeeding her baby at Walmart around the time Kirby was killed. So Maddie Jane, who I think you're going to hear, pretty much ran this investigation. Maddie Jane turns her attention to Jeff. Says, well, Jeff must have had something to do with it. Now, a couple things about Kirby. He is good at making money. He's bought and sold liquor stores. He owned a few houses around town that he rented out. He's basically buying and selling anything he can get his hands on. Precious metal, gold, things like that. Anything. Anything somebody's buying or selling, he's buying or selling. Now, Kirby also, you're going to hear, did some business with some seedy people. He did some business with gang members. He ripped some people off. Before he was murdered, he passed off a bunch of fake diamonds as real, sold those to some guys from Chattanooga. I don't know if that was ever investigated, but you'll hear about it. You'll hear about a guy that Kirby sold a liquor store to, a guy named Ray Palmer, who owed Kirby over $100,000. And a week or so before Kirby was killed, Kirby went and talked to a lawyer to file a lawsuit to sue Ray Palmer for this $100,000. You're going to hear that Ray Palmer and Kirby had a conversation about 24 hours before he was killed, where Ray Palmer threatened Kirby, threatened him and his family, said, this is the kind of money that people get Kirby. 24 hours later, Kirby's dead. Ray Palmer never investigated. David Hancock threatened to shoot Kirby in the street. Scared Kirby so bad that he actually wrote it down. Here's what happened. Here's what David Hancock told me. Never investigate. You're going to hear a lot of proof of drug sales. You're going to hear that Kirby was selling a lot of meth, selling a lot of pills, and buying meth and pills in bulk. Affiliated with a lot of dangerous people. People who were never, ever, ever investigated. Never. And that's because Maddie Jane was convinced that it was Jeff. And there's no proof whatsoever that Jeff was even in Mississippi when Kirby was killed. And Maddie Jane is frustrated with this investigation because it goes on for a few months and nothing's done about it. She gets on Facebook, tries to solve this case herself. And you're going to hear from Chris McAllister probably today, who's the lead investigator of this case, and he's under a lot of pressure from Maddie Jane. And finally, about a year after Kirby was murdered, they get a break in the case. And that's because of a guy named David Barnes. Now, David Barnes was a very good friend of Kirby Carpenter. David Barnes also had a pretty bad meth and pill problem. He was an addict. And almost a year after Kirby was killed, David Barnes gets arrested for breaking into 4 local businesses. And that changes everything. Because David Barnes has a problem. He already has at least 5 felonies on his record. So he's looking at life in prison. And the day he's arrested, close to life in prison. So the day David Barnes is brought in, and they ask him about these burglaries, they interrogate him for 3 hours. And David Barnes would later say that he was high on meth for that entire 3-hour interview. He talks to Chris McAllister. He tells him about he and Kirby's drug dealing. He tells him about how he, would go with Kirby and they would buy a bunch of drugs and Kirby would sell them at Lake Mohawk. They press David Barnes. We know you know something about Kirby's death. We know you know who did it. Spence's did it, didn't they? David Barnes, after 3 hours, doesn't say anything. He said, I don't know who killed my friend. He gets arrested. The next day, they talk to David Barnes for 2 more hours. We know you're involved in this somehow, David. Did you drag the body? We know you had something to do with this. We know you know. Tell us what you know, David. You can be a suspect or you can save yourself. And finally, David Barnes breaks down and starts crying. And he says, last year at Kirby's funeral, Caitlin came up to me in the middle of the funeral and she said, my dad killed Kirby. And Jeff is standing right there. And according to David Barnes, Jeff says something like, yeah, you'll be next if you tell me about it. You would think this proof would be corroborated, that they would talk to some other people. Did anybody see David Barnes and Caitlin talking to each other in the middle of Kirby's funeral? You would think they would check that out. But nope. 4 or 5 days after David Barnes says this, they put out arrest warrants for capital murder for Caitlin, for Karen, for Jeff. All of them. Based on what David Barnes said after a 5-hour interview when he's looking at close to life in prison. Now the problem is, they can't convict Jeff based on what a 5-time convicted felon and drug addict said Caitlin told him a year ago. They need more proof than that. they have all the Spences arrested, charged with capital murder. And now they go through those bank boxes that Mr. Mueller just told you about. And they find cash, and they find coins. And they find a lot of other stuff in those bank boxes. And they say, well, Kirby had cash, and Kirby had coins. And Jeff has cash and coins, so they must belong to Kirby. And Jeff must have stole those from Kirby after he killed him. Those are the dots they're trying to connect. The problem is, the investigators can't tell you where any of the stuff in the bank boxes came from, when it got in the bank boxes, or who it belonged to. And pay close attention when we start talking about these bank boxes. Some of those items were there long before Kirby was killed. A lot of the state's proof is based on the proof they don't have. You're going to hear about Jeff's phone. There was no activity on the day of the murder. Pay close attention to that part too, when we start talking about Jeff's phone. Because they extracted all the phones. They extracted Jeff's phone, Karen's phone, Kirby's phone, Caitlin's phone. They've got all the phones. So, Caitlin's arrested too. And after she sits in jail for about a year and a half, she goes and talks to the investigators with her lawyer. And for the first time in 2.5 years since Kirby's killed, she goes, oh, well, my dad kind of implied that he killed Kirby. After she says that, she gets right out of jail. And you're going to hear from her this week. There are so many people who had motive, who had opportunity to kill Kirby Carpenter. So many people who wanted to see him harmed. Those people were never, ever investigated. The only people who were investigated were the Spences. It is going to be impossible for them to prove to you that Jeff had anything to do with this. Because again, Jeff was in Virginia when Kirby was killed. And you will see that at the end of this trial. Thank you.